All
right, here we are. Okay, webinar started. We are 12 on the dot and we are ready to go. Welcome everyone to our webinar today. My name is Aileen McDonough. I'm the content director here at Eversea, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's webinar about combating credit push fraud. First, we're going to do a couple housekeeping details. There will be a Q&A at the end of the session. So if you just want to submit your questions through the chat, I can take those on. And if we don't get your question for any reason, we will follow up with an email afterwards with an answer. This webinar is also being recorded. So all registrants will receive a link to the recording after the webinar, as well as a copy of our 2024 annual trends report, which just came out today. We're very excited about that. Today's webinar features one of our Eversea experts, Melissa Sutherland, our VP, and a highly sought after speaker and thought leader in our industry. She's joined by special guest Jordan Bennett. As Senior Director of Network Risk Management at Nacha, Jordan focuses on understanding the benefits that third-party senders bring to the system while mitigating the risks associated with that business model. He also runs the Nacha Certified Program, which educates third-party senders in the ACH network about risk management, responsibilities, and best practices. I will now hand it over to Melissa. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Aileen. I appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Jordan. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your expertise, and your overall goodwill in the risk ecosystem with us. I'm really glad our schedules were able to knit together.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
What I'm going to do is let me quickly go over the summary of what we're going to talk about. And then we're going to get in the time machine and go back a couple of years and set the stage for the topic that we're going to have our chat on. I think there's a lot for us to go over today. So the title of our session is, this is not an easy topic. It's big. This one's meaty. Big. So we're tackling new Nacha risk management rule amendments that affect all non-consumer network participants. So Nacha's voting membership recently passed a set of amendments to the Nacha operating rules that are intended to reduce the incidence of successful fraud attempts and improve the recovery of funds after frauds have occurred. Lofty goal, and I'm super excited to dive into that. The rule amendments fit together as a set, and they follow the flow of credit push payment to promote the detection and fraud, both through the origination process at the originator, the ODFI, and any third parties, and at the point of receipt at the RDFI. I think everybody should become very accustomed to ODFI and RDFI as acronyms that will be bandied about a lot this morning. Stopping credit push fraud requires that all organizations help in mitigation efforts to identify and stop this type of fraud. I think that's a really, really great closing sentence for what we're discussing today. Requires that all organizations help. Last week I was at the ETA, and one of the thematics throughout all the session was this notion that if we do not partner across the entire landscape, we will not impact a meaningful change. We'll have a start, stop, start, stop. So I think that's a really interesting discussion topic of us unifying all the organizations together to combat this. But before I jump in, I'm going to pause and zoom out and speak to you as a human. I adore having you on my fireside chats. I think your knowledge is just stellar in the environment, but your passion about combating bad actors and your ability to translate really complicated topics is outstanding. So bravo to you and your speech style and doing it. And to help everybody on the call, can you spend like a second or two? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but just talk about your prep style when you go into sessions like this, because I think you do such a remarkable job.
Oh, well, thank you. I just try to know the material well. I've worked with a lot of this material going into, from the start, from working on the framework to helping craft some of the rules language and working with the industry to get the information out there that's so important. So it's one of those topics where, I try to be very knowledgeable whenever I speak, but it's, speaking on topics that are part of what I do every day, make it a lot easier.
Outstanding. So you, by definition, because you've authored a lot of the material, You don't have that normal anxiety of what if I get asked a question I don't know the answer to? Well, you do have all
Oh,
the answers.
well, I have not authored all the material. There's a big team of people that are involved in
Of
this.
course, of
You
course.
know,
But you've
we
touched it.
all work together. Yeah, I have touched it. Yeah, and I've been involved in the process. But to say I don't get the anxiety, I think is a bit of a stretch. You know, I always worry about it because you want to do a good presentation, and you know, I've got my weaknesses too. You know, every now and then I get told you need to project, and that's hard for me. I can be very loud, but a lot of times I'm not loud enough. So listening to people's feedback and taking it with you know, what they're trying to help you is I think the best way that I find.
Outstanding. And thank you for being so transparent with your answer. I plan on complimenting everybody who does public speaking because it's so difficult. I'm not particularly keen on it. Knowing your
You're
material and
fantastic.
being
You're always fantastic. People
it's
line
a
up to
complete
see you.
it's an act. Be passionate about the subject, it gets easier.
It,
So let's do this. Let's zoom out before we get into the meat. And I think what we should probably do is let's level set what Nacha is and how does Nacha fit into the money movement ecosystem. And the second part of the question is what doesn't Nacha do? So let's get everybody on board with what you guys are and what you are not.
sure. So we have two major sides of our operation, right? We have one side that is into rulemaking and does everything around that rulemaking process, the rule enforcement process. And then we have a conference side that's out talking about education, providing memberships, and getting the industry together. And those two sides work together very well. We are actually a not-for-profit. I don't think most people know that, but we are a self-regulated industry, and the financial institutions have all come together and worked to make sure that we continue to be self-regulated. Because if we don't take action by updating the rules like we're doing now, we're going to get regulated by people that don't know our industry as well. So, you know, I have to give a lot of credit to the financial institutions for taking, you know, an active approach to helping us manage those rules and to manage, you know, everything on the ACH network. You know, one thing that people also think that we do that we're not. So I'm glad you did ask that aspect. We don't actually transfer each ACH item. The ACH operators do that. So the Federal Reserve is one, and then the clearinghouse is the other. And they're the ones that actually have the connections with the financial institutions and are making those transactions happen on a daily basis. So good question.
So you don't touch cash. You don't see it. You don't move it.
We don't touch any ACH items.
Do
We
you
make the rules around it, and you know, if we have to, we can do enforcement. We do get some data, but we don't see each individual transaction.
Excellent. So if something goes terribly wrong, we shouldn't call you. Essentially, you're not able to help facilitate the solve, or maybe.
No, we absolutely can facilitate, right? That is part of what we do. But you know, reach out to your financial institution. We can work on messaging. We work with the financial institutions. We have that communications aspect. We are that, you know, a central body of information, and have some tools available to us to communicate with the industry. But in a, you know, in a specific bank instance, work with your operator, work with you know, work with the people in the transaction. If it gets to be huge, work with us, and then we do have tools.
Outstanding. Edge cases, people want to run ideas by you, things that they're seeing, reach out to you.
That's how rules are made,
Fantastic.
right? We get a lot of input from the financial institutions, but we take input from anybody. The rulemaking process really starts with the participants on the network. So if Melissa, you, or any of the people on the call have a great idea, they can reach out to Nacha and say, hey, have you thought of this? And here's what it could mean for the industry. And here's how you could implement it, you know, these things. And then we take it into different committees. I run the risk management advisory group. I'm the staff liaison there. We would then talk about it and then send it over to the rules and operations committee. And that is where not just staff will really put meat on the bones. They will write it all out, talk back and forth with the financial institutions that own the Rules and Operations Committee, and then send it out to a ballot. And the member banks, as well as the payment associations, will vote on that ballot. And then that's how it becomes a rule. But it can all start with anybody out in the audience.
That's outstanding. And I don't think that's widely known out in the payments ecosystem, that the next great idea for how to enable great payments and or disrupt bad payments is already out here in somebody's brain. We just need to get it into yours to debate internally. And there's no idea of we make the rules, you don't get to participate. It's open, transparent, and that's where the fun begins, right?
Yeah, that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to be open and transparent in our rulemaking process. We want to work with all the participants. We always put out an RFC. I guess I skipped over that part last time. A request for comment or a request for information, or RFI if we're not as far along. But when we get send out those RFCs, we do get a lot of feedback. And the rules we're talking about today, we sent out an RFC back in June of last year, and these rules just were passed in March because there was a lot of feedback from the industry. We really do take your feedback, consider it, and think heavily about your perspective on how it's going to affect you as a participant. Again, we don't actually touch the transactions, so we need your feedback, and we get all that feedback taken into account and then craft that final rule language. You can see a big difference from what we proposed back in June of last year to what actually finally went through. And that's through people like you on the call.
Outstanding. And can anybody participate? And I'll stop beating on this topic.
Yeah.
Anybody can participate, or do you need to be a member financial institution, or can we just have the community at large keep an eye on when you ask for comments and they can weigh in?
The community at large can always respond to an RFC. We put it out there. It's very public. We do press releases. We want to get everybody's feedback. You know, we do get a lot of bank feedback, and many times your bank speaks on behalf of you and how they think you interact as an originator or a receiver or whomever whatever role you may be taking. But, you know, they're not you. So respond, give us some feedback. We really do want to know if we've got something wrong and it is going to have unintended consequences. Yeah, because rules do. And we want to limit those as much as possible. We've done a really nice job in the history of ACH where we don't have to make a lot of updates to updates, right? We get through that transparency and that interacting with everybody who's a participant, we generally get the rules right out of the gate. And that's our goal, right? Not, you know, like Congress will pass a law and say, oh, we didn't mean that. And then they pass something else. We don't want to do that.
The consumer friction, go once, implement, and let people flex around the rule. That's it. It's an outstanding philosophy, and you guys are very elegant in the way that you do your rules. So I'm gonna take everybody on a little history lesson. I think it'll be good to frame up why we are in 2024 and the new risk package that you've just announced. So I'm not going to go back too far in time because it could get very timely or very time consuming. Yeah, so we'll do September 22. Nacha releases some risk framework. And there's 3 principles of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to increase awareness of fraud schemes that use credit push payments.
Yep.
We are trying to reduce the incidence of successful fraud attempts. And we're trying to improve the recovery of funds after frauds have occurred. Awesome goals. Very, very similar to the goal alignment that we have coming into your new adjustment in 24. This is the methodology of what we're trying to attack. And then we have 24. So I'm going to read you a stat in 22.
Okay.
And this is by no means a critique. This is just to frame up the ecosystem. Banks saw an 84% increase in check fraud in 2022, according to FinCEN, a unit of the U.S. Treasury Department. So we got an 84% increase in 2022. February of 2023, FinCEN sends an alert out on the nationwide surge in mail theft-related check fraud schemes targeting the U.S. mail. So FinCEN now is to the point where in 23, we're sending alerts like, hey, this is extraordinary. We need to get ahead of it.
And I think that it's an important note on this one, Melissa, is that all of this is happening at the same time. There's a drastic reduction in the number of checks overall.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So
it's an interesting comment.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely correct. So we have the USPS officials are weighing in saying we have security gaps in the postal system, plus a lack of prosecution in check fraud cases has allowed this crime to run rampant. And I think that's a little bit bombastic, but this is a news headline, so of course it's bombastic.
Sure.
So we have the pandemic that puts everybody trapped in their homes. We have a surge in the idea of, ooh, the mail system is really vulnerable. Are there checks in it? Ooh, fantastic, there are. Now we have people still locked in their houses who go to Telegram and like, oh, actually check washing is really not all that difficult. Oh my goodness, this is a really keen new little cottage industry.
Well,
So
I
we
think
have
it's even deeper than that, Melissa. I think the ACH network over the past 20 years, this is our third framework. We've had two previous frameworks that we've worked on, and we went from a significant amount of unauthorized returns back in the early 2000s down to, I think the rate that last year was 0.04% of forward items come back as unauthorized. That's a significant reduction. I think the card brands have done a great job on stopping fraud as well. So whenever you stop fraud in one place, it's going to pop up somewhere else, right? And so, we're never going to get rid of debit fraud. It's not going away, but we've managed it, we've mitigated it, and we're going to continue those efforts. But that's why fraudsters have changed their view and their tactics, and they're moving to checks, and they've moved to these credit push schemes that affect not only ACH, but lots of other different credit push networks and schemes.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And I think everybody historically in the payments credit ecosystem knows when you suppress one vector, it simply moves and comes over here. And then it moves. Right. I think one thing that is a constant, regardless of the payment mechanics, fraudsters are incentivized. They want cash. They don't care how innovative they need to be. They have no budget constraints. They don't have to worry about overtime. They don't have any constraints. So of course,
they'll take it ACH, they'll take it wire, they'll take it check. Any way you want to give them money, they will take it.
Absolutely, without pausing for, was that a successful? They don't have KPIs. They just need cash, right?
Right.
2024, we have the Association of Financial Professionals doing their annual survey, and a couple of nuggets I pulled out that I thought were interesting. 63% of organizations experience some form of a BEC in 2023, and that's an email compromise. That's a tremendous number of people being hit with email compromises. For the first time since the AFP began conducting the payments fraud survey, ACH credits have surpassed wires as the favorite threat vector where cash is being siphoned off. So it's the push fraud is where is where the siphoning has happened. So they've
there are so many more ACH credits than wire. So as a percentage, I don't know what that calculation is, but when you have a payment as popular as ACH, it's bound to happen, right? The fraudsters are learning about ACH credit push fraud and how to use ACH. It's affecting lots of different payment systems, and it's the same scheme. And like we said earlier, they'll take it if you give it a wire ACH. So on the ACH network, we have to do our part and make this better. We don't like that statistic, but it's a real statistic and one that really has been motivating us for the past few years to get after this type of fraud.
It's interesting that you say that it's been motivating you. In prepping for our discussion today, I was out reading, and the volume of information coming out from your side is sensational, but Federal Reserve banks, community credit unions, like the volume of people in your space having these conversations it's substantial and meaningful. It's not just be careful people, be wary of people phoning you. It's substantial, meaningful steps that you can take to protect your ecosystem. So I think from your side, getting it out to the ether is probably not the problem. I think it's probably the adoption of let's get better across the entire value chain, because we can't have one person that's really good at it and 19 that are vulnerable. Before we jump into it, I think maybe talking a little bit, if you can,
sure,
some of the ways credit push fraud is penetrating the ecosystem. So we'll get to your rule piece in a moment, but how is it happening? Like, what is the threat typology? What does it look like in a typical scenario?
So, and for this case, let's just take out the payment system used, because again, it doesn't matter. Let's take vendor impersonation, and let's talk about something that affected me personally, Melissa. I used to live in a city called East Point, Georgia, and it came out last year that they had what looked like a vendor impersonation fraud. And this is where a fraudster is going to contact a city. They've done it to many different cities. They've done it to universities. Most of your contracts are open records, right? Because the government should be transparent. We want to know who wins contracts and who the money's going to. So they award a contract. The fraudster says, oh, look, there's a contract out there for X number of dollars. Let me go ahead and call up that city and see, are they going to change the account and routing number for me? So they call up and they say, hey, I'm the vendor. I haven't submitted an invoice yet. Don't worry about that. I'll send it to you later. Can you please change my routing and account number? And these cities should have processes and procedures in place, right? To confirm that that's the right vendor, whatever their controls are. Sometimes they don't do it. That routing and account number is changed, and then the city gets a real invoice from the real vendor, and they go ahead and pay it, right? And East Point, I think it was over $1 million that they lost, and this is not a wealthy city. It's happened. I've seen it happen for up north, like snow plowing in the hundreds of thousands. We've seen universities around the country lose out many millions of dollars. I talked to a small startup last year, and they were a victim of this type of scheme. They only had a few people, and they wired essentially all of the money out. This was an ACH, but they sent all the money out to a fraudster, and it's gone. And that small startup has lost all their capital. So these are things that can happen, and that's just one instance of a credit push fraud. Another one that can happen to individuals is payroll misdirection. This is where a fraudster calls up. They know that Melissa, because you do all of these webinars, works for Eversea, and they call up Eversea HR and say, hey, my name's Melissa. Your company's so big, your HR doesn't know your voice. And you say, hey, Melissa, I'm changing my bank account. Can you go ahead and put my direct deposit into this account? Or they've done things where they say, can you put 5% of my income into another account, because Nacha's been doing split and save. And in that case, sometimes Melissa may not even notice because it's a change in tax time. Who knows, right? All the employees don't go into their benefits all the time. And so they siphon 5% for a long time. It's a terrible scheme. This employee is losing all this money, and the employee didn't do anything. A fraudster called out or called HR or went into the payments platform, your HR platform, and changed your direct deposit information, and your direct deposit goes somewhere else until you notice. Usually people notice if it's 100% on payday, and then you call up your HR and say, hey, I need to get paid. I worked here, and they say, well, we did pay you. And then they look and say, oops, and the employee is not out the money. It's the company who's going to lose that money.
Those are two really good examples, and I think it sets the stage for us going into what are we doing about this.
Mm-hmm.
The push fraud is not an elaborate thing that only Microsoft needs to worry about. It's down to
very rarely
human level.
Yeah, it's almost always human level. Somebody has tricked you, and you're instigating that payment. Somebody instigated that payment. The fraudster, in most cases, is not hacking you, it's social engineering. They see somebody on a webinar like Melissa and get a little bit of information, right? Or they see my name, right, and get a little bit of information. Almost every year, we have a very large conference coming up. It's the Smarter, Faster Payments Conference coming up in May. And we've had fraudsters send Nacha staff because they know when you are on business, they know when you're traveling. They will say, this email is from our CEO. I need you to send $15,000 right now. It's for whatever their reason is, and thank goodness Nacha staff is well trained. We can spot these things, but it happens not only to us, but it happens to almost anybody because we have so much public information out there and available that fraudsters can look at, see, and use.
I think, and the horrifying thing is the accessibility of all of our public information. It always crushes my soul when I see on LinkedIn when somebody's like, "Yay, I got a new job and I work here," because I know that company is now going to get targeted. Their HR department's going to get targeted on behalf of the employee, and the new employee is going to get hammered before anybody has had a chance to teach them. The CEO will never ask you for gift cards. Please don't ever wire money to the CFO because he called you from the beach. He's never going to do that. So this idea of us saying, I want to tell the world that I'm fantastic and I got a new job versus, ooh, I just set myself up for a massive attack.
Yeah,
So
well, and they're using that.
of course,
I was looking at LinkedIn the other day, and I had done a presentation and was getting a lot of hits, and then I got a bunch of hits from the Moscow area. That creeped me out.
Only slightly intimidating.
Yeah, I don't know who that was, but I don't think it was somebody on the ACH payments network in the United States, right? It is, probably our adversaries. I don't know.
Look, everyone needs a merchant account. I'm just
Yes.
saying. Don't judge. No, it's
Right.
interesting though, this accessibility of information and thinking about the topic that you're trying to mitigate against. It's $20 on a go get me an iTunes card. You're pushing money, you've approved it, but you're being puppeteered in the background for malicious purposes. To the
Absolutely.
massive email compromise where now people are embedding themselves into your organizations, to the North Korean case where they were on LinkedIn masquerading as legitimate folks who had gone to legitimate universities. These folks got jobs as remote workers sitting in North Korea, siphoning off trade secrets and then asking people to push money here and push money there. So the elaborateness of what you're up against is incredible. So thinking about risk management in general, let's talk about 2024 phase one of your approach, because this is a multi-year approach that you've announced. And I would love to touch into the thought process around this multi-yearness of it. So let's kick off and let's get into how are we combating this? What do you guys, phase one, what's happening?
Sure. So let's our risk management frameworks. We've had this is our third, right? So it really directs how we are positioning ourselves over the next few years. This is not a once and done, solve all the issues right now. We're going to do this, then we're going to implement some new rules that we haven't even thought of yet, right? It is a constantly changing landscape. This is a package deal, and we wanted to make sure that they all went out together, and we wanted to see that they were all approved together, which they were. We were very happy because they do fit into a set, and they follow the process of a credit push payment to promote the detection of fraud from the origination process all the way to the start, at the originator, through to the ODFI, through any third parties, through the point of receipt, all the way down to the RDFI. So it's everybody but the consumer. And when fraud is detected, these rules are trying to empower, an ODFI to request a return for any reason, an RDFI to delay funds availability because they're doing that research, and for that RDFI to return a suspicious transaction on its own initiative. And that's very important, without waiting for a request, without waiting for a reversal or a customer claim. Because if you are banking that fraudster, you want them off your system too. You don't want to say, oh, well, here you go. I know I've got a fraudster, here's the money, or they're a mule. You want to have that power to return that item. And, because they're gonna turn on you at some point, right? The fraudster is an equal opportunity taker advantage of, right? They will take advantage of you eventually after they're done using you for taking it from other people. And we've got, this is a good opportunity. I know we only have we're well into it without having actually talked about the rules. I've got essentially what the rules are.
Please.
Sure. So our first one is fraud monitoring by all parties in the ACH network except consumers. And this is on ODFIs, originators, and third parties. What we're saying is that you need to have process and procedures in place to stop fraud monitoring. At origination, you need to somehow make sure that you have a reasonable system in place to detect that fraud. It can be looking at, big changes. Has this originator ever sent $500,000 to this particular originator? Is this a new one-time recurring payment that seems out of scope? You can do it in all sorts of ways. What we've found out when we make the rules is that we like to give you the what without telling you exactly how to do it, right? Because if you look at different organizations throughout the whole payments ecosystem, they vary so much. If we try to give you exactly how to do something, we're going to overprescribe for some and underprescribe for others. Let's take a financial institution. A small institution may have a lady in the back or a man in the back that they process HH files. They look through that list of every item coming in, and they know their customers. They've got a process and a procedure in place, and they are monitoring those transactions. And so they can say, that looks good, that doesn't look good. Other financial institutions, let's take some of your major financial institutions. There's no way possible, right? They are not going to know their customers one from another. So they're going to need to implement a much different, process and procedure. Probably involves software, right? That is looking for flags. They can say this is a CCD credit, which is a commercial credit, going to a consumer account. And it's for a large amount of money that's never gone out before. They can flag that. And there's probably a point in there. Maybe it's not $5, maybe it's not $200,000. It's probably somewhere in the middle where they determine, on a risk-based assessment that where their risk is, we can let $5 through, but maybe not over the certain amount. We don't have to stop all these red flags and stop all these transactions. Under, but over, we're going to do more due diligence, look into it, and see what's going on. The only thing that we say you can't do, Melissa, is nothing. You cannot say we've done a risk assessment, we've assessed our risk as nothing, and so we are not doing anything to stop this. You've got to figure out what that right process and procedure is for you, and it does need to be risk-based. Yeah, go ahead.
Really quick question on that. Are you thinking at all in getting a little bit more prescriptive in the KYC onboarding piece, or are you simply mandating right now you're staying in the risk arena at the transaction level? And feel free to tell me not to ask this question and we'll move on.
No, absolutely. No, that's actually a really, really good question. So ACH payments is a batch system, right? You are not required to monitor each item before you post it, but creating a transaction history of a person would be helpful. That is something you can do. If you are, I've lost my train of thought, but it is different for each party and how they're going to do it. We are not going to get down into this prescriptive of how you do it by party, just that you have to do something. And we're going to put out a lot of guidance, and we're going to do that for all kinds of different parties, for the originators who've never had to do this before except on web debits, right? Yep. For those third parties, for those ODFIs. And a lot of this aligns with the KYC and onboarding that is done through current regulations, right? Your BSA, AML, they already do it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we're asking as a financial institution or other parties, when you're looking at these transactions and how you're monitoring, many times the operations area and the BSA AMI areas do not talk to each other. And you do have laws and things that you have to keep certain things restricted to that area. Totally fine, right? But that doesn't mean you can't talk. That doesn't mean that you don't have experts already in-house, and that though you can't learn from those BSA AML folks that are already doing something, that already have process and procedures in place that can detect some of these frauds and help out the operations area. Maybe the goals aren't exact, but they are very much aligned.
Very much so. And I think this ties back to our opening statement of sharing across the org, sharing across the ecosystem. Doesn't mean you breach what you're supposed to keep secret, but there's ways to data share from transaction to human, to originator to transaction. We can do
Yes.
that. There's going to be a lot of obvious red flags from bad actors when they come in, because they come in at scale.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. And so let's talk about some of the RDFI monitoring. Let's
Please.
switch over to that. This is something that we haven't had before. This is unique. You know, we've always on the ACH network, and we still are, stating that you can post by account number and routing number. There's no name matching, right? But there are things that the RDFI can see that the ODFI can't. And so the RDFI really needs to help become involved in this monitoring. One example is that payroll misdirection, right? So if they're attacking Melissa, which I used you in my earlier example, you know, if I'm a mule or if I'm the fraudster myself and I'm at the RDFI, I'm probably attacking lots of people. And so as a bank, you know, as an RDFI, you can see, oh, it looks like Jordan Bennett, the fraudster, or Jordan Bennett, the individual, has received 5 payroll direct deposits. That's a bit unusual, wouldn't you say, Melissa?
You're industrious, but you're not that industrious.
Right. Yeah. And there could be cases of somebody having multiple jobs.
Sure.
There could be cases of somebody's teenager now getting a job and they're having it put in their account. Is that a proper use of an account? That's not the ACH network's job to determine. That's other banking laws. Probably not proper, but is it wrong?
We're not worried about
Is it
that.
fraud? Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are legitimate reasons you could have, but it is a red flag, right? Especially if it all of a sudden happens. So you want to be able to look and say, oh no, there's 8 different names coming in and they're from financial institutions all across the country. This seems weird. Why don't we look into that? So that's an example of what the RDFI can see. Or if they've had a consumer who, you know, has just opened an account and then all of a sudden they're receiving, you know, $100,000 under a corporate or business transaction SEC code. Well, that seems a little bit weird. What are we doing to identify that and making sure that your consumer, your customer is not a fraudster? Because these fraudsters are using that money to attack other banks. As an RDFI, you know, the liabilities and warranties aren't changing. So it's still on that ODFI, but you still have a role to play. We want to protect every participant on the ACH network because they're using that money to attack all of us. If they get stronger, if they get that funding, you're going to be a target. So
it's an interesting point that the rep warranties liabilities on the receiving side aren't shifting, but now the accountability has been introduced for them to monitor in their ecosystem. I think this is a brilliant approach. The long term, and I don't speak for your organization, I don't have a crystal ball, but the obvious long term is inequality of ownership of responsibility and liability across the value chain. Then we have an equal push to combat what's happening. On the credit card side, you see a lot of this debate surrounding issuer and acquirer. Same debate, issuer and the cardholder accountability, right? It's who carries the burden of keeping bad actors off the ecosystem, and it's acquirers. We know this to be true. And issuers to a lesser degree, to a degree, but to a lesser degree. And then you have the consumer running around happily using their card anywhere because they have zero liability, right? In these fraud events and the RDFI is picking up an accountability piece of it. I think that's an interesting first step in your program. What are you thinking from a prediction on the volume of R17s? Because that's how you're enabling and empowering the receivers to throw money back out, right? Is the R17s? That's the new code?
Yeah, it is the R17. You're jumping ahead.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Apologies.
No. So that was the next thing I was going to set up, right? Was allowing an RDFI to return for suspicious activity is the return reason code. So we've always on the ACH network said as an RDFI, you can return a transaction for any reason. You must just find the closest return reason code. And there wasn't anything for suspicious transaction. And we've changed the language in our R17 so it is very clear that an RDFI can return that language for a suspicious transaction. And I want to point out on your earlier comment, we are very clear in the rules about no changes of liability and who can enforce the rules. This is not opening a huge can of worms. Nacha still is the only party able to enforce the rules. So the liabilities stay exactly where they are. And please go to nacha.org/new rules, and that is rules with an S, to find the exact details of all the rules we're talking about today.
I think this is an amazing step. So can I, on my R17, I'm super excited about this.
Yeah.
What is your, and if I ask a question that you don't have an answer to, just tell me. What is the time frame on the R17s? Did you set up a time frame framework for it?
So the time frame is, so most of our rules are you have to comply by dates, right? They are not, you can use these before. So if you're ready to start returning things R17, go forth, go forth and start using R17. So very rarely do we have one that says you can't use this until. Start compliance now. I think that's very important. Start your journey towards compliance on the monitoring, the using of R17. We put out an ODFI's ability to request a return. You can request a return for any reason. You can talk about suspicious transactions, and we've defined a new term out there. It is called false pretenses. And that's going to be in a lot of these rules. And this is the inducement of a payment by a person misrepresenting that the person's identity, that person's association with authority to act on behalf of another person, or the ownership of an account to be credited. So a lot of these rules, that R17, the request for a return, these are all tied to that false pretenses and in this fraudulent inducement. So go ahead and start stopping the bad guys, right? Start using the tools that are available to you.
Outstanding. And what is your and I'm fascinated by this new code being introduced. I think it's going to give you some granularity into what's happening out in the ether. Any expectation on volumes that you expect to see in here, or too early to say?
We've already seen it being used. We've already seen it being used. Yeah. So what we have to do is get out ahead. We can't stay fully ahead of the fraudster. We have to say somewhat reactionary in that, they have to start doing something before we notice it. But we want to take as much action as possible. This is not a major problem yet, but we have to get ahead of it. We can definitely see this is where fraudsters are going. We're seeing more and more news topics about it. And so these rules are trying to be proactive rather than reactive on the ACH network to make changes before this, before we lose trust in the ACH network.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're the most trusted payments network right there, right now. So we want to keep it that way.
Of course, absolutely. Where are you seeing the volume come from and migrate over to R17s? Like what reason code is it leaving from where the
Oh, no, so
RDFI?
there really wasn't anything before, and we put out guidance periodically. If there's not something perfect, the rulemaking process does take some time, almost a year, as you saw this last time. So we've been saying for the past 2 years, go ahead and use R17. That is the closest thing that we have.
Okay,
Use it, and because you can always return it, you can always do a return as an RDFI. You just have to pick the closest code, and that
So
has
you just, you tighten up the definitions. Okay, cool. Just
tightened up the definition. Yep.
Yeah, I thought we'd see a significant decrease in one and it popping up over here. So let's shift really quick and talk about funds recovery, because I think that's probably, now that we've got the process, we've got ODFIs and we've got victims. So what are we working towards getting that cash back to the people that have been victimized?
Yeah, sure. So it's at R17, and it's allowing the ODFI to request a return. So the ODFI, and all of us have been in the situation where you have a conversation with someone and you're like, oh, I should have said this. Or, and so when somebody is on with a fraudster, they're talking to them on the phone, they're communicating, they say, all right, go ahead and send out that payment. And then you say, oh, wait, did I mean to do that?
Oh
I
no.
think I've been scammed, right? Then you call your bank and you're trying to get that money back. So the ODFI can reach out to the RDFI and say, hey, I sent out this payment. I'm requesting a return. Please help me. My consumer has been scammed. My business has been scammed. Use this tool to request that return. It's not always going to be successful, right? If it happens 30 days later, probably not going to be successful. But it is a tool that if you get off that phone immediately, realize you've been scammed, already approved that transaction, or even within a day or two, you have the ability possibly to get that money back. So just another new tool. And we're also, for that funds recovery, we've created an exception to the RDFI funds availability requirements. We have removed specific ACH language requiring you to have it by the end of the day. It now lines up with Reg CC, so that's going to give you hours, and in some cases, almost another day to do your research before you post that transaction. So it does line up with Reg CC. Know what your funds availability requirements are. You do have to be conducting research and figuring out if this is a bad transaction or if I need to return it. So there are some things you need to do there, but know that you don't have to post it immediately if you think it's suspicious.
I think that's an incredibly important statement. By slowing down the sense of urgency, you increase the probability of proper due diligence. I don't know that, and I think that's one of the key takeaways is echoing that. Last week when I was speaking with some folks on the credit card side of the house, there's this idea that up until maybe a year ago, frictionless onboarding was the absolute superhighway to success. So it was removing frictionless anything is terrible, right? But they're pulling out as many data elements as they can to onboard as quickly as possible. To the inevitable question is, at what point is frictionless negligence? And now you see this introduction of a reasonable, sensible friction. Intentional. Yeah, I'm going to put
I've heard that term and I love it.
It's fantastic. I think this is absolutely a course correction from the speed to now we have, let's throw some intentional friction in here. Put some here, put some here. Wait, that is absolutely too good to be true. And I think the level set here to balance out the time obligations, you don't have to get the cash to this person as quickly as possible. Certainly with this volume of cash that's under review of, that seems strange. Years ago, I worked in payments and I remember I was on a holiday and I got a phone call and I was standing, it was New Year's Day on a pier in New Orleans having a lovely time. And my phone rings and I answer it. And it was somebody from our settlement team who said they got a call from an RDFI that said, you just sent a tremendous amount of money to a human bank account under a corporate identifier. This person just opened the account. We're going to hold it. And I was never more, it was a beautiful, and this was years ago. And we sent her a gift basket. They returned the cash. Nobody economically was harmed. We had to then unpack what had happened. And it was somebody redirecting a settlement, right? Very common in the payments ecosystem. So
Sure.
with the loss of sense of urgency, then you'll have people that are really good at being suspicious, doing good work. Now that you can't scale that, that was a very tiny receiver receiving a tremendous amount of money, so they got very nervous.
Sure. Well, and I think that's a perfect example. You know, when we talk to people that are merchants or in the card world, they think, oh, what does Nacha have to do with me? But when you're settling, you know, if you are a merchant acquirer, if you're a merchant, if you know all of these card payments come through, people are buying stuff, and then Visa and MasterCard are settling up with you, that comes over ACH. And if you have a vendor impersonation where somebody is pretending to be you and that settlement goes somewhere else, that's all of your day's earnings, your week's earnings, however often you settle, right? So it is a lot of money and it affects you over ACH. So, you know, everybody needs to pay attention to this.
You know, it's an interesting comment. A lot of folks don't necessarily, they move money for ACH and they allow ACH in their merchanting, but it doesn't really resonate with them that ACH is the money that's moving underneath. That it's you guys, it's not just an ACH merchant account, it's you're moving the settlement money. So from a payment processing perspective, looking now at your R17s might be an indicator you might have an account takeover problem in your environment that you didn't know you had. Very tiny little ones here and there that the merchant may not have noticed yet, right? So understanding your piece in the payment processing, even if you're not technically in ACH, you are. Not just over here, and ACH is moving the cash for you.
Yeah, we've got huge numbers out there, Melissa. Check out the quarterly stuff that was released yesterday on our website. ACH network is moving a huge volume of money.
Oh yeah,
so we want to protect it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. You guys just aren't checks, and I think that's you. And again, when I was getting ready for our session, you are all over the place hosting sessions and panels. Which I just think is incredible. You're doing such an amazing job getting the word out to the environment.
We're trying to. You've got to.
Yeah, it's never ending.
We're doing with you. We're doing with all of the different people. The people on the phone call, or this webinar can reach out to their customers. You know, we're just trying to get the word. We've created a bunch of white label material for financial institutions to use. It doesn't even have our name on it. We don't care to get. We're not trying to get rah-rah points. Use the information, send it out under your name. You know, we do lots of different things like that, trying to get the information out.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
We're at time. What we'll do is we're going to pause here and say thank you to you. Thank you to Nacha for doing this. Thank you for being good custodians of the industry. We have your payments conference coming up in May in Miami. So everyone
Miami
can go
Beach. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Fancy. I'm far too pink to go to Miami. It's just the sun. Like even when I going through the airport, people are like, don't leave, just stay indoors. We have our Safer E-commerce Day coming up November 1st. Be on the lookout. We're putting the agenda together. I think Mr. Bennett from Nacha is going to be able to participate. Thank you, my friend. I'll wrap it here. If you need anything, please, Jordan, always reach out to us. We're happy to help. Anybody on the call, you need anything from us, reach back out. We are happy to introduce you to Jordan, partner you guys with Nacha. They're here to help and keep all of us safe.
Yeah, and we didn't get to last, two of our rule updates, but all of that again is available on nacha.org/new rules. So please go out there and look at those on the standardized entry descriptions and the written statement of unauthorized debit processes. We're trying to get those written statements back very quickly, and so there's been some changes there that really should help many merchants out there either not process another transaction or hold those goods and not ship them out. So the faster they get it back, the better.
Outstanding. And I talked too much. My apologies for
That's okay. We had a good
blowing
time.
past it.
Oh, no, it was excellent. Thank you both so much for sharing your expertise today. And just remember, everyone who registered will get a recording over the next few days and our trends report and some takeaways. So thank you and have a great day, everyone.
Take care. Be safe. Thanks.